Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Just to give you guys a little bit more of a brief introduction to you guys. First, I'm honored to be able to be here and to teach and to just share God's Word with you guys. But before I get into the study, I just want to give you guys a little bit more of a brief bio about myself, because I know when you go to a new church or when somebody else comes in, you're like, who is this person? What are they all about? What's their agenda? Well, I don't really have an agenda. I just want to teach God's Word and be faithful to what He's called me to do. And so I grew up in Spokane, Washington. I played soccer all throughout my childhood. I went camping all throughout the Pacific Northwest and just loved to be able to be up there and to enjoy God's nature. And through my time up there, I ended up meeting my wife, who grew up in Tacoma. She moved to Spokane. We met when I was a senior in high school, and then shortly after high school I graduated, and then I got married. And then we had 3 wonderful kids that are here with us today. My son's 13, my oldest daughter is 12 in a couple days, and my youngest is 10. Shortly after getting married, I started working for the federal government, the U.S. Geological Survey, and did that for about 10 years. Started in northern Idaho, moved down here to the Boise area about 9 years ago. And during that time, the Lord really just began to work on my heart and prepare me and call me into the ministry. And I'll get into that later in the part of the message. But over the last 5 years, I've been an assistant pastor at Calvary Chapel Meridian, and then the last 3 years, I was on staff as the youth and missions pastor at that church. But my wife and I began to sense that the Lord was preparing us for a transition about late last summer, early fall. We didn't know what that was going to look like, and we just began to pray. And just, okay, Lord, if you're transitioning us out, you obviously have something else for us. You have another place or another ministry that you want us to be a part of. And so we continued to be faithful with teaching those kids and coming alongside the missionaries, and just waited on the Lord. Well, about 8 months ago, it was clear to us that our transition out of Calvary Meridian was needed. And so we transitioned out of Calvary Chapel Meridian, and I transitioned off staff. And for about the last 4 months, we've been at Calvary Chapel Treasure Valley, where we've just had this season of resting and waiting on the Lord, and just seeking Him and allowing Him to be able to minister to our hearts. But I know you didn't come to hear just about me. That's not what this is about. So we're going to go ahead and get into the study this morning. But before we do, I just want to open by asking a question. If you were to go to a bookstore, or I guess maybe not necessarily a question, but if you were to go to a bookstore, I could guarantee that you could always find a book that claims to provide you a quick fix. You know what the books I'm talking about? It's The Secret to Success, the Secret to Weight Loss, The Secret to Financial Freedom. Thank you, Dave Ramsey. The Secret to a Healthy Life. If you've ever picked up any one of those books, you'll know that there are some great tips, tricks, and things that you can take from those books if you are seeking to actually implement that into your life and see some change. But what if I told you that the Bible contains all the answers to all these questions? And specifically, the Gospel of John provides you with the secret to a healthy life. Would you be interested in hearing more, or would you be skeptical? Within this gospel, the Gospel of John writes these I am statements. Basically these statements that characterize, or they're specific things that characterize Jesus. And this last I am statement is the one that we're going to focus on this morning, found in John chapter 15, where we can learn the secret to a healthy life. So if you go ahead and flip with the, or scroll, whatever you do to get to your Bible, John chapter 15. And this morning, Lord willing, we are going to be covering the first 17 verses. So I'm going to go ahead and read the whole section, and then I'll pray for our time, and we can dig in a little deeper. John chapter 15, starting in verse 1, it says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, so you will be my disciples. As the Father loved me, I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments, and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends, if you do whatever I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you, and appointed that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain. That whatever you ask in the Father, that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. These things I command you, that you love one another. Lord, we're grateful for this opportunity to be able to be here this morning, to open your word, and to be able to receive what it is that you have for us. God, I pray that you would just settle our hearts down right now, Lord, that our minds wouldn't be distracted with the things that are going on around us or the things that are going on in our lives or this world, but we would be able to just focus on what it is that you are trying to teach us this morning. Lord, so would our ears be open, would our hearts be ready to receive? Would you fill this place with your Holy Spirit, Lord, and do a work this morning? We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So as a point of context, Jesus is about his ministry, and he's about to wrap up his earthly ministry. If you were to go back in John, or if you've ever read John before, chapter 13 and chapter 14, you will see that he's more or less spending his final moments with the disciples. All throughout the gospel, the first part of that gospel, you'll see that it's all about ministering to the people, the miracles that are happening, the lives that are being impacted. But there's that transition where he knows that he's about to depart and go to heaven to be with his Father, and he knows what kind of impact this is going to leave on the disciples. Now, he takes that time to really just invest into those men and to prepare them, to have a few final words. They just finished the upper room where the Lord had introduced the Lord's Supper. And Jesus had revealed to them the promise of the Holy Spirit that would come when he departs. In chapter 14, if you look there real quick, it ends by saying, "Arise, let us go from here." These men and Jesus were about to depart from the upper room, and they would begin to work their way up the Kidron Valley, where Judas, one of Jesus' disciples, would end up betraying him. But on their journey, Jesus stops, and he takes another opportunity to teach the disciples. You know, that's one thing that I love about Jesus and just watching his example is he would use any common day stuff that these people would see on a regular basis, and he would teach them through this illustration, through this image. And after his departure, you know, just thinking about this as I'm just saying this, after his departure, these men, as Jesus teaches them by the vineyards, and there's these grapes that he's teaching them by, and just what an example that would be every time that they walk by that now. They'll remember this message that Jesus is about to teach, and how he does the same for each and every one of us as well. But these men are on their journey. Jesus stops, and he takes this opportunity to teach them an important lesson. So looking back at verse 1 again, it says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." The first thing that we see here is Jesus make this claim. I am. His final I am statement. I am the true vine. What is significant about vines? And why does Jesus use this illustration to speak to the hearts of the disciples? Jesus said, I am the true vine, meaning I am the original, There are no other vines like me. All other vines are copies of me. In the Old Testament, Israel is pictured as a type of vine. Psalm 80, verses 8 through 19, it starts out by saying, "You brought a vine out of Egypt." In Jeremiah 2, verse 21, it says, "Yet I planted you a choice vine, wholly of pure seed. How then have you turned degenerate and become a wild vine?" This visual image that Jesus uses to paint the picture for these disciples would have been a hot topic for the people in Israel. God had chosen the Israelites to be his chosen people, to be the nation that would represent him. He brought them out of captivity. He provided them the promised land. And throughout the Old Testament, we see time and time again how Israel failed to obey, they failed to trust, they failed to have faith. And really, when we read that time after time, don't you think that God had every right and reason to give them the old boot? You failed me. You aren't listening. You aren't doing what I've commanded you. And yet, instead, we see that God is gracious. When the Israelites would fall off the tracks, God would send a prophet to help get them back on track. Say, "Hey, don't you remember what I told you? Here, let's have this reminder. Let's have this crash course." And they would get back on track, and the whole idea was to keep their eyes focused on the King. Now, I think about my life. I don't know, maybe you guys can relate, but there's many times where I've fallen off the tracks as well. And the Lord is gracious to me. He loves me. He cares about me. He wants to come alongside me. He wants to be that vine that gives me life. The second thing that we see here in verse 1 is, "My Father is the vine dresser." Growing up in Spokane, Washington, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but back it used to be, when I was younger, or when I was a kid, it used to be beautiful. It's changed since. I think that's the whole state of Washington. But there's this place just right outside of Spokane called Green Bluff. And if you've ever been there, you wouldn't forget it. I don't think anyways. Maybe it's just a nostalgic or a childhood memory that I won't ever forget. But it's this place, you drive outside of Spokane, you drive up on top of this bluff. It would be similar to going to Emmett, but Emmett, you go down the hill, It's similar to that, but it's orchards everywhere you look. Doesn't matter what you're looking for. You can be looking for apples, you can be looking for peaches, nectarines, cherries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, you name it, pumpkins, strawberries, everything. It was like that picture that Chris had put up there. It had everything that you could be looking for, minus the pineapple. There was a lot of childhood memories that I had up there. But every year we would go up there. We'd make several trips. You go for whatever the season is. And I used to love going up there and going on these trips. My mom and I would go up there, and not just my mom and I, but our whole family would go up there, and we would just enjoy the different crops, the different seasons that were being grown. One short little tangent, there was one time that my mom and I had gone up there, and we thought, "Hey, let's go pick some cherries." And we started going out there. We weren't really given any direction. We just went out. They said, "Yeah, the ones that are," there was a sign said, "The ones that are marked with whatever color." Well, we didn't really pay attention a whole lot. We went out there and we're like, "Yeah, these cherries, they look good." We started picking, and when you're up there, you can kind of pop a few in your mouth and try it. Make sure you give it the taste test. Okay, these are actually good. And then there was a moment where we're both just kind of standing there, like, there were a bunch of cars at the entrance, and there are no people here. What is going on? Like, maybe we should go back and make sure that we're in the right area. Well, we had gone back and went in, and right about the time we went in, we overheard the person at the front, or the register or whatever, tell somebody else, "Yes, if you want to go out and pick cherries, make sure that you go over in this direction with this color that's marked on the tree. Do not go on this side because we just sprayed these with pesticides." Oops. The fruit looked so good, but had a little poison on it. But every year we made a trip up there, And one day I began, and as I was preparing for this, and just this section is just something that's really just ministered to my heart. But I began to think about the amount of time that it would take for a farmer to care for that farm, care for that orchard. Each year they would cultivate, they would trim, they would prune, they would clean, they would weed, they would water, they would care for whatever crop it was that they were growing. When I start thinking about that, I think, man, that's a lot of time. That's a lot of dedication. My parents are still up there, and we'll still go up there to this one orchard in particular, and it's the same couple that are there. Now, they've been there every year, faithfully doing those things and growing this crop. Why? So that other people can enjoy it. But it made me think, if we care so much about those things of the world, care so much about this crop, the things that we eat, how much more do you think God cares about us? He cares so much more about us than we could ever care for ourselves. He spends time growing us, teaching us, cleansing us, purifying us. Why would God do this? Why does God even care about us? Ultimately, I think that he does this all because he wants to see us healthy. He wants to see us growing. He wants to see us fruitful. He wants to have this healthy relationship with us. We want to have that with him. One where we would have a fulfilling life, being able to use the gifts that God has given us for his glory. But what is our part in this? We turn to verse 2. It says, "Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit." So we are told that we are the branches. How does that make you feel, branch? What is the purpose of a branch? To be honest, I never even really thought about this until I started reading this. What is the purpose of the branch? Does the branch not have one purpose? To bear the fruit? To bear the leaves? To bear what the tree is growing? The amazing part is that the branch doesn't even produce those things. The branch doesn't produce the fruit. The branch doesn't produce the leaves. You can go and break a branch off the tree, and the branch will be a stick. But how can the branch bear much fruit? Did you catch the word that was repeated time after time after time? By abiding. This word within this section is repeated 11 times in 17 verses. I trust that Pastor Chris has told you this, of when you go through the Bible and you see repetition, that usually signifies that there's something that the Lord's trying to teach you. This term, abiding, I think Jesus is trying to make a point to the disciples. This word isn't one that we would typically use in our language today. The Webster Dictionary defines it as to stay, to remain, to live, or to dwell. For us, if we were to hear abiding, I think the only time would be when the police officer pulls us over and says, "You were not abiding by the speed of the law." I don't know that I've ever really heard the term outside of that, except for in the Bible here. But Warren Wiersbe, in his commentary on this passage, explained to abide this way. He said, to fellowship with Christ so that his work, to fellowship with Christ so that his life can work in and through us to produce fruit. But what does it take for a believer to abide in Christ? Let's look at verse 3 and 4. It says, "You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me." The biggest thing, and really I think it's probably one of the most humbling things that we need to come to terms with, is that we are all weak. How does that make you feel? Somebody telling you that you're weak. It doesn't matter how strong you think you are. It doesn't matter how muscular you are, how much weight you can lift. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are. Jesus is our source of strength. And there are a few Bible verses that remind us of this. In Philippians 4, verse 13, it says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 10, it says, for when I am weak, I am strong. Maybe it's just me, but it brings me comfort knowing that my strength comes from the Lord. It's through Christ that I am able to lean into his strength, to learn how to abide in him, how to have this relationship where I can rely on him rather than myself. When you start relying on yourself and your own strength and your own abilities, that's a dangerous place. You don't want to find yourself there. Yeah, God's given each one of us gifts so that we can use. He's given each one of us, if you were to look around this room, we're all unique. God has gifted each one of you with something specific that maybe your neighbor doesn't have the idea about. But when we continue to lean into what our abilities are and things that maybe we're good at, and, well, I can't serve there, I can't do that because I'm not good at it. You know, God doesn't call you to be good at things. He calls you to be faithful. God wants to be able to walk alongside you. He wants to show his strength through your inability to do something. Continuing on in verse 5 and 6, we read, I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, bears much fruit. For without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. The result of a branch that does not abide and does not bear fruit, we just read there that he takes away. He gathers together and throws into the fire to be burned. Verse 6 is a verse that many scholars and Bible commentators use to try to make a theological point off of this text. But there's a couple things to point out here. The branch will always bear fruit as long as there's life in the vine. Now, if we think about that and we look back to that, the vine is Jesus. Jesus paid the ultimate price. He defeated Satan. So there will always be life in that vine. Jesus paved the way for us to be able to have everlasting life if we choose to follow after him. But the thought is that if you're not bearing fruit, you will lose your salvation. That's what some Bible commentators say. That's a theological point that they say. But there's a couple things to keep in mind before you come to this conclusion. One, it would be unwise to base your theological beliefs off of a parable, a story, an illustration that Jesus is trying to use to teach these men. This belief would contradict what Jesus said back in John chapter 6, verse 37, where he said, all that the Father gives me will come to me, and whoever comes to me I will never cast out. While I do not believe that you can lose your salvation, I do believe that you can willingly turn away from God and reject him and reject following after him. I believe that we have all been given the choice to choose to follow him, just as much as we've been given the choice to choose to reject him. That's pretty powerful, isn't it? The creator of this universe would allow us the choice. But doesn't that show how much of a gentleman God is? He doesn't force us and say, you will have a relationship with me or else. Again, maybe it's just me. I don't like being told what to do all the times. So if I'm told you will have a relationship with me, it would probably be like, yeah, that's what you think. But that's powerful. We have the ability to choose to follow after him. just as much as we have the ability to choose to reject him. And we know that, like I said, Satan has been defeated. Jesus is victorious. We know that there is still a battle that wages before us. We're told about that all in Ephesians, of this battle that's not against flesh and blood, but it's against spiritual powers and principalities. A battle that, at times we don't even see that's going on around us. A battle that wages at times in our mind, in our hearts. What are you going to choose? Are you going to choose to follow after him, the one who created you, the one who knows you so intimately, that he knows your thoughts before you even think them? Or are you going to choose to reject him? Now we move into the results of the branch that abides and bears fruit. As we read that section, we saw that the branch that abides and bears fruits, he prunes. Now why would God do that? To bear more fruit. We moved into our house in Meridian, and when we moved in, one of the first things we did was plant a grapevine. I'm teaching on this. I should know this. We planted a grapevine, and throughout the years, sometimes it's been fruitful. Sometimes it's just like exactly what Israelites were told that they were, this wild vine that's growing all crazy. It looks like it's going to be fruitful, but it's like, oh, just a couple little clusters. That's fun. But this last Friday, we were out there, and I was looking at the grapes, and man, we had a ton of grapes. Went out there and started picking them, and it's just this one little thing, and it's like, man, we might get a small bucket out of it. In the end, I ended up picking them all, and then we picked them all off, and maybe it's just a weird thing that I like and I make our family like, is that we then freeze the grapes, and then we have these frozen little treats later. And it's absolutely delicious. But anyways, we went and did all this, and I started taking off all the grapes, and 12 pounds later, it's like, holy cow, this is a lot of grapes. That's a lot of fruit. That's a lot of fruit that we get to enjoy into this next season where there isn't going to be fruit, where those grapes aren't going to be growing. But practically speaking, how do you think that God prunes us in our life? Anybody?
He enters people into your life and subtracts people out of your life.
Adds people into your life, subtracts them from your life. Trials, tribulations. Yeah. He allows those people into your lives to help shape and mold you. He allows those hard and difficult circumstances for you to go through those so that there will be growth. He takes you maybe to that next stage or the season of life where maybe you will be stretched in an area where you thought, I'd never do that. And then down the road you look back, you're like, man, I said I would never do that, but look what you have me doing, Lord. I told you that I was never going to go there, but here I am. He uses the Holy Spirit to convict us. Now, at times, pruning can be painful, can it not? We become comfortable in our circumstances and our abilities. But pruning creates and promotes new growth or shaping for a healthier system. As I was going over my notes this last night, it made me think about our own lives. Talking about this pruning season. It's been a difficult thing and challenging, and at times it's just like, Lord, why are we going through this? For us to transition out of this church where we had been at for 9 years and transition into what he has for us moving forward. That's a hard thing to go through. But then I read something like this and I say, okay, Lord, what are you trying to do in our lives? What are you pruning us for? What are you preparing us for? It's something for each one of us to think about in our own lives. It made me think of this trip that my wife and I had made a few years back before Portland got weird, and we had stayed outside of Portland in the town of St. Helens, I think it was. I don't know if you guys have ever taken a trip and you didn't have a destination in mind and you just went. We're planners. I'm a planner. I don't like doing that. But it was just one of those where it's like, we don't have any reservations. We don't know where we're going. We're just getting on the road and going. It was our 10th anniversary. We ditched the kids with my parents and took off. It was great. It was one of the best trips that I think we've ever taken together. Because we didn't have an agenda. It wasn't like, hey, we're going to stop and do this. And, we didn't need to plan it. We just allowed to be able to have this time. Well, one of our stops was going into this Japanese garden in Portland. Now, I really like gardening. I like to think that I have a green thumb. I like growing plants and flowers, and I've never been good at vegetables. They always seem to die, but that's okay. The store has those. But there was this time where we stopped at this Japanese garden, and when you don't have kids with you, you're able to enjoy things a little more. You're able to walk around and not be like, are we done yet? Right, kids? But while we were there, we did this loop, and there were a couple arborists that were out there, and they were working on this tree. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, they must be cutting off the branches or whatever. And, we were there for, I don't know, a couple hours. But we did this loop around the entire thing, and it's like, well, what do you want to do now? Well, let's just go around again. And so we went around again, and we stopped. There was this bridge where they had ponds and then the little river between the ponds. And we stopped at this bridge, and we were just watching because it's like, man, those arborists, those people working on that tree, they're still there. What are they doing? And we're sitting there watching, and, everybody else is just kind of walking around us. And what we found was that they were working on some sort of pine tree. And what I thought was that they were just trimming off or pruning, the branches or whatever. We ended up seeing that they were just kind of sitting there on the tree and just doing that. Like, it's a pine tree. What are you doing? But as we watched, they were picking out every little dead pine needle. That would be a tedious job. That would be painful to just sit there all day on a little cherry ladder thing and to just be sitting and picking pine needles. How's your day at work, honey? Good, I got 20,000 pine needles. But the more I started to think about that, the more I started to realize they were picking off the dead and unhealthy parts to promote growth on this tree. Now, I have that picture embedded into my mind as I read through this because I can imagine God doing the same exact for us. He's not forcing us to do anything, but he says, hey, you know what? This quality that you have, let's go ahead and hey, we want to help grow in this area over here, but let's go ahead and take this out. Let's go ahead and begin to put this person in your life so that you will be stretched in this way. Oh, you're not patient? I'll give you someone who will require you to be patient with. The fruit that the branch bears is a witness to what? To the plant? To us? It's a witness to the Lord. The fruit that we bear in our lives is enjoyed by who? Ourselves? No. By the people around us. Have you ever considered that in your own life? The witness that you bear? Because it can be easy to claim, yeah, I'm a Christian. I go to church. This whole Jesus thing, I'm on board. But what kind of witness do you bear? What if you were the only opportunity that somebody had to choose to either accept or reject Jesus? All based off of your life and how you lived. What do you think the result would be? Now, it's not our jobs to be like, oh, I got to do all this and, got to work all day long. And, make sure that I'm doing all these good things and, putting on this front like I'm this good old Christian two-shoer. That's not our job. But at the same time, as we allow the Lord into our hearts and into our lives, out of the abundance of our hearts, that life will flow. If you are totally surrendered to the Lord and seeking after Him and wanting to grow in Him, that's going to be evident in your life. People will look at you and say, there's something different about you. Made me think of a time, and this isn't like a boasting thing about myself, it's just a crummy circumstance that a coworker and I found ourselves in. And, a situation like this. When I worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, we did a lot of things that would take us to places that you would otherwise not be. One of those places was down into the Owyhee River. It was, 4 or 5 years ago, there was massive flooding down on the Owyhee River. Well, one of the things that we had to do after the fact was go down and try to survey in with the technology, with digital stuff, to go survey in these high water marks so that you can try to get an idea of how much water was actually going down the river. So we had the boat launch where we had to launch out, and at this time, the river had gone way down. So we had our kayaks, everything, inflatable kayaks, everything was loaded up on these things. And our job was to paddle downstream 2 miles, and then we had to do the survey, and then we had to paddle back upstream or walk through the puddles back upstream to get back to where our camp was. Well, there was this time where when we had gone down to do that, it was miserable. If you've ever been down in the desert, that far, it was a hot summer day. You would think that the water was refreshing and cold. It was not. It was warm, borderline hot, and it was uncomfortable. Well, we only thought that we were going to be there for a short time. I'm one that, I carry my water bottle like I got here. I drink water like crazy, and so I had more than enough water, but my coworker thought, well, we're only going to be down there for a couple hours, so he only brought himself about 32 ounces of water. There's a lot of things that we learned from this trip. We didn't have any other way of getting water. Didn't have a water filter or anything, but he went and he worked through all of his water, and about middle of the day in the heat of it, he's like, man, I'm so thirsty. I don't know how I'm going to be able to get this. What do you mean? Get some water. I ran out. What do you mean you ran out? I only brought 1 water bottle. Okay. And it was this whole thing where we were going back and forth. It was just the circumstances. We're very miserable. Now, through all this, it's like, all right, well, here, have some of my water. And we both, by the time we ended up getting back to the camp, we were both pretty dehydrated. And it wasn't fun. But in the midst of all that, the technology was not working. Surprise, surprise. Things were not going as planned. Again, surprise, surprise. And it was one of those where it's like he was just fuming. He was upset. He wasn't happy about the situation. He made that very clear. And then there was a moment where he just turned to me and he's like, how can you have so much joy right now? Now, that was an opportunity for me to say, well, because the Lord gives me joy. Because, he's the one who gives me this strength. But what did I do? I don't know. It is what it is. But people notice those things. I tell that story because people notice the difference in you when you are living for the Lord. Sometimes they'll say something about it. Most times they probably won't. But what kind of life and what kind of witness are you living in your life? But this brings up a good question of what is spiritual fruit anyways? There are examples of fruit being discussed in the New Testament. If you're following along in the outline, I had put those in there, each scripture reference. But Romans 1:13 says, we are part of the harvest. In John chapter 4, verse 35 through 38, it says, we grow in holiness and obedience. As we grow in holiness and obedience, we are bearing fruit. Colossians 1:10 says, our good works, our service, grow out of our abiding life. Hebrews 13, verse 15 says, the praise that comes from our hearts and lips is actually fruit to the glory of God. And then Galatians 5, I'm sure we're all familiar with this one, 22 and 23, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I'm sure we can all sing the children's ministry song together. Exactly. But again, you look at it, what does fruit do? It draws people in. Your pastors talked about how there's these little fruit trays, and how'd you do it? You all know that fruit is good, most of the time, as long as it's not bad fruit. So I could guarantee that the fruit that's in the other room is going to be taken after service, because I can't wait to get some of those grapes, some of that cantaloupe, some of that watermelon, whatever it is. You know that it's good. The fruit that we bear in our lives is a witness to those around us. I want you to think about the witness that it would be if every believer bore fruit the way that we are being told here. Bore fruit for Christ, what this community could look like. You know, I think a lot of times there can be so much division within the church because of other things. And I think that's a tactic of the enemy. You know, I can't go to that church. I can't talk to that person because they believe. But what if we just put that stuff aside, put our own agenda aside, and said, Lord, I just want to be a fruit bearer. I want to be a witness for you. What this community, what your group of people, what your workplace would be like. I can only imagine that it would be transformed. That people would say, I don't know what's different about you, but I want that. I want to be a part of whatever it is that you got. So I need to just ask you to evaluate your life, as I have many times as I've gone through this. Are you bearing fruit? Self-evaluation can be a hard thing at times. And sometimes we aren't honest with ourselves. And so nudge the person next to you and say, hey, am I bearing fruit? You may not want to do that if you don't want a truthful answer. Sometimes it can be hard to hear the truth. But what we read here is that if you're not bearing fruit, the cure is to abide in Christ. To remain with him. To be putting your heart and surrendering to him. Now, as we move into the second part of this study, we will see the results of what happens to those who abide in Christ. Let's go ahead and read verses 7 through 8. It says, if you abide in me, and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you. By this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit. So you will be my disciples. The first result of an abiding in Christ is answered prayer. Answered prayers are found through abiding Christ in his words. You might be asking, well, what's the purpose of prayer? You know, I know that a lot of people, that I've talked to anyways, they're like, yeah, I know that I should pray, but, it just seems like I'm talking to myself. We had this conversation before service started, talking to yourself, do you ever answer back? Well, certainly you do. But when you talk to God, that brings it to a whole nother level. But Chuck Smith, the founder of Calvary Chapels, he said this in a book that he wrote on prayer. He states, the purpose of prayer is that we may join hands with God to accomplish his purposes here on earth, and to accomplish what otherwise might not have been done had we not prayed. Did you know that through your prayer life, you can reach into China? You can reach into Africa? You can reach into Ukraine? You can reach into your own house. And things can be accomplished that otherwise would not have been accomplished had you not prayed. You go back and look at some of these men and women who have gone out and become missionaries. And I've read, a handful of books. I really enjoy biographies of these men and women that have gone out before us. And reading books like Hudson Taylor and others, George Mueller, these men who, they were down to at times the last little bit and I don't know how I'm going to feed this entire orphanage. Lord, I need you to provide. And they seek the Lord about these things. And what happens? The Lord provides. The Lord hears those prayers and he answers them. I think the hard thing, or maybe it's for us, the thing that we have a hard time with is we often say, Lord, I need your help in this, and I want it to be red, and I want it to be shiny, and I don't want the base model. I want the model up a couple, and then I want the payment. Actually, I don't really want a payment, so I just want you to give it to me, and if that can be happen by 12 o'clock today, that would be great. And then when the Lord doesn't answer our prayers, we're like, oh, God, you didn't answer my prayer. And we can get angry. And be like, God, why didn't you answer this in my time? Why didn't you give me exactly what I asked for? Well, that's the beautiful thing about prayer, is that oftentimes we're praying about things and we don't exactly know all the details. And while we might pray for something specifically, God might say, I hear you, but that's not what's best for you. I hear you, but let me go ahead and give you this. Or let me go ahead and maybe not answer that prayer right now, but use this as an opportunity for me to show you that I am God, and for you to continue to seek me, you to continue to pray and to ask for my help. But how impatient we can be. How impatient I can be. I've had moments recently where it's just like, I'm praying about something, and it's like, gosh, Lord, don't you ever hear my prayer? And then something happens, and it's like, oh, please forgive me. I'm getting frustrated with you. I'm not in the right of heart. But you're working all things out behind the scenes. You're working these things out so that ultimately the glory will go to you, not to me. That's humbling. But prayer is our glorious privilege we have been given access to. And I know that when we abide in Christ, we are in fellowship with Him daily. That when we begin to pray, our prayers will be aligned with His will. I was listening to this podcast, I work at an engineering firm in Meridian right now, and I build electrical control panels for industrial applications. And it's an interesting job because I don't have any electrical background. I never thought that I would ever be doing anything like this. And there are times when it's just me out in the shop, just me and the panel. It's just a bunch of electrical stuff. And it's like I'm sitting there looking at the stuff, and I enjoy working with my hands and building things. But, it's like, Lord, what am I doing here? Why am I building these? Why did you open up this door for me to be able to get this job? I don't have any experience. I'm ill-equipped. I mean, you name it. But then the Lord put it on my heart of, well, I have you here for a reason right now. And if nothing else, in this time of quietness, in this time of stillness, while you are working in the quietness of this shop, you can pray. You can begin to come before me and bring these things before me. You can get into my word. You can listen to these other pastors who teach my word. You can be growing. You can use this as an opportunity. But while prayer is such a crucial part and element of our walks, why is it often the last thing that we do? How much are we missing out when we are not abiding in Him and we just don't pray to our Father? Continuing on in verse 9 through 11, it says, As the Father loved me, I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full. The second result of abiding in Christ is love and joy. There are many times in the Bible where Jesus emphasizes the need to love. If you recall the Pharisees back in Matthew chapter 22, they asked Jesus as they're trying to stump him or stumble him, "Hey Jesus, what's the greatest commandment of the law?" They didn't care for the answer. They already knew. These men were Pharisees. They knew what they were talking about, but they were trying to get him to answer the wrong thing so they can accuse him of something that he didn't do. But Jesus responds by saying, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind." And the second, it's a funny thing about Jesus, they only asked him for the greatest commandment, but he responds, the second, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love can be a hard thing, can it not? It's hard to love those people that really annoy you. It's hard to love that circumstance. It's very difficult. But as followers of Christ, when you put your faith and trust in Him, you are called to a higher standard. You see, this raises the bar from what the world tells us, does it not? Because if you were to go into the world, they might tell you to love in general, but they would tell you to love those who love you, to love those if it benefits you in some way. But when you love the way that God intended you to love, joy will overflow. The joy that God provides is completely different than that temporary joy that the things of this world provides. I told you at the beginning how my family and I loved playing soccer. I loved going camping out in the outdoors and all over the Pacific Northwest, into Canada. I loved it. It was something that I really hoped to be able to, do that with my own kids as I got older. I loved and I enjoyed that time. But the thing, as I look back on that now, and I'm not able to do it as much as I did when I was a kid, it made me think about this in particular of how, did I enjoy all that stuff? Absolutely. Who doesn't like to go on a vacation? Who doesn't like to go and do some fun things that you can spend time with the people that you love and you care about? But the thing about it is you work all this time up to prepare for whatever it is that you're going to do. You go and do it, and you enjoy it as much as you can during the moment. And then once it's done, it kind of fades off a little bit. You're like, man, I'm looking at these pictures, and that beach looked really nice, or that mountain with the deer looked really nice, or, whatever it might be looked really nice, and I wish that I could be back there. And then as time continues to go on, it begins to just fade and fade. And what happens? You begin to long for the next thing, the next trip that's going to bring you joy, the next whatever that might come into your life that you're going to find joy in. It doesn't have to just be a trip. It can be a car. It can be technology. It can be anything. But you're always dreaming, always planning of what you're going to do next. That's what the things of this world provides. Yes, you have joy in those things, but that joy comes and goes. But the joy of the Lord endures. The joy of the Lord abounds and it overflows. You can have joy even in the midst of the hardest thing that you will have ever dealt with in your life, because your joy comes from the Lord. Finally, we see in verse 12 through 17 the third result of abiding in Christ. Starting in verse 12, it says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you. I no longer call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should remain, that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give you. These things I command you, that you love one another." The third result of abiding in Christ is friendship. God has made us relational people. As much as we might try to think like, no, he's made me to be alone. I'm a lone ranger. Me and my dog. It's just the two of us. He's desired for us to be in community. He's desired for us to have relationships, to have friendships. I was talking with some guys about this last night of, God's desired for us to be in church, to have this time of fellowship with each other. Can you do it over technology? Can you watch something online? Sure, you can. But he wants you to be around other people. He wants you to be doing life with other people. He wants to be using those people to grow you, to encourage you, to equip you. There are Bible verses like Proverbs 27, verse 17, where it says, "Iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another." Or Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 12, where it says, and though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken." If we were to evaluate our lives, I think that we would find that we have a lot of acquaintances and a few close friends that we can actually share life with. But we all know that friendship can be a very hard thing, because oftentimes those friends, those people that we love so dearly, don't meet our expectations. But the thing is that we have the privilege to share life with Jesus, our one true friend. Our true friend who will be there through the thick and thin, no matter how good or bad we might think that we are. No matter what choices we make, he will be there with us through it all. We can depend on this friendship. And through this friendship, we have the opportunity to serve a higher calling. A perfect illustration of this, of being a friend of Jesus, can be found in Genesis chapter 18. If you remember the story, I'm just going to paraphrase for time's sake, but if you go back there and look at that, Abraham's just sitting outside in the shade of his tent, and he looks out, and behold, there's these three that are coming towards him. We're told that, it's God and two angels, and they're making their way to check out Sodom and Gomorrah and just the sin of that city and the destruction, and really they're going there to wipe it out, to purge the sin, to purge it, and Abraham sees them, and he immediately jumps up and he begins to serve these men. As the passage continues, these men are about to depart, and Abraham went out with them to set them on their way on the rest of their journey. There's a transition that takes place in this section that I would encourage you guys to go back and just read it, but it's this transition that takes place that God says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" And as we look at what we just read here in John chapter 15, looking at verses 15 and 16, we see this beautiful image of our relationship with Christ and what that looks like. Just like Abraham, God has chosen to be friends with us. He's not hiding anything from us. It's full access. You want to know more about me, God says? Read my word. You want to have this relationship with me and have this dialogue with me? Let's talk. God made this sacrifice to set us free from the bondage of Satan. He's extended his grace out to each and every one of us so that we might have a relationship with him. In Romans, it tells us of many things that we must consider in our lives, but looking at Romans 3:23, it says, "We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God." Romans 6, verse 23 says, "For the wages of that sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life." And Romans 10:9 says, "All we have to do is confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in our heart that God has raised him from the dead, and you will be saved." Like any normal friendship, you have to choose and be willing to accept this friendship. And my hope and my prayer is that each one of you will choose to have that relationship with him. There's statistics out there that say or that claim that, not everybody that comes to church and who have been regular attenders even are actually believers, have actually surrendered their lives to the Lord. Whether that's true or not, I guess, that's only between you and the Lord. But if that is you, and you're here and you're like, yeah, I'm just going through the motions, I'm doing this to please my spouse, what's stopping you from taking that step? What's stopping you from taking that step and starting your relationship with him today? But my prayer is that you would surrender to him, that you would seek what he has planned for your life. God doesn't promise that it's going to be an easy life as followers of Christ. There is no guarantee that life will be easy. In fact, I think it kind of goes the opposite direction and says, hey, you're going to experience trials and tribulations. You're going to experience persecution, but that's because of me. That's because of what I did. That's because of what Jesus has done for us. That people will just be offended by the fact that we are light and there's darkness in this world, and light and dark do not mix. But Jesus can be the best friend that you ever have if you're willing to let him into your life. So as I close, just want to address a question that may be on the hearts of some of you today. What benefit do I really have in abiding in Christ? How does this even benefit me when I already have a busy schedule? You know, I had to work through this on my own. I've had these same thoughts. You know, there was a point in my life about 7 years ago where I got to this point where it's like, you know what, I've been chasing after all these things of this world. I put my hope and my assurance in this government job that would never fail me. Uncle Sam's going to be there for me every step of the way, right? Yeah, right, that's right. A couple government shutdowns later and the paycheck's not coming, and it was crud. I'm in between a rock and a hard place right now. So I put everything, I hung my hat on that. It was about that career, about that status, about getting that American dream. Got to get that house, that picket fence, the golden retriever, the kids, the wife. But the Lord began to work on my heart and show me, hey, even though you started chasing after all these things, you can still turn to me. And that was a moment in my life where I chose, I've been calling myself a Christian, I've been putting on the hat. I'd go out and do all the crazy world stuff all the way up until Sunday, and then I'd show up to church and, yay, Jesus, hallelujah, amen, good to see you later, and then I'd go right back to it. And the Lord began to work on my heart. I had that choice, just as much as each one of you have that choice. Are you going to choose to surrender to him and follow after him with all of your heart? And seek to have this fellowship with him, this intimate relationship? Or are you going to remain focused on the things of this world? When I look back on that, I think, has God done some crazy things in my life? Absolutely. Have there been difficulties, trials, tribulations? You know it. But I look back and I think, I wouldn't have it any other way. Because God is good. God is on the throne. So my final question to you is, now that you have heard the secret to a healthy life, are you willing to implement this into your life? Are you willing to allow God to do a work in your heart so that you may bear more fruit as you abide in him? Lord, we thank you for this time and this opportunity to go through your word. I pray, Lord, that as we leave here this morning, that you would just continue to show us how we can grow closer to you, how we can trust you, how we can have faith in you, Lord, and how we can just remain in you with everything that we do. Lord, I pray for the person, maybe there's somebody here, somebody watching online that, they want to take that step, they want to surrender to you. I pray that they would do that there wouldn't be any distraction or anything that would, that the enemy would try to deter them with, but that they would come to you surrendered and just submit to what it is that you have for them. May you be glorified through this time, through these words, through this text that was spoken. Lord, that we would be an impact on those around us in the community and the network that you have each one of us in. We thank you and we praise you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.